Hey, what's going on, guys? This is John with Super Deformed Gamescast, and I wanted to take a few minutes and give you guys a kind of a quick review on the 8Bitdo SNES 30 Pro controller, which you guys can see right here. Now, it came out on Monday. I've had a few days to play with it and mess around with it. I actually meant to get this video out sooner, but just various things this week, from just being very busy at work to being a little under the weather, have kind of delayed it a few days. So, unfortunately, you're just now getting it. Why does my screen keep going dark? Anyway, finally wanted to sit down and talk to you guys a little bit about it. So here it is right here. As you can see, it looks just like an old school Super Nintendo controller with a few very small but very key differences. But before we get into what's different, let's talk about what is the same. As you can see here, the form factor is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a Super Nintendo controller. In fact, I've got one. I wish I had it here for comparative purposes, but from the shape to the weight to the dimensions, it is damn near identical to what you would have played on the Super Nintendo. Even right down to the color scheme, and also the X and Y buttons are concave, just like the old Super Nintendo controller. So that's a neat little attention to detail. Very lightweight. It's solidly built, but you also don't get the sense that it's going to weigh down your hands or anything while you're playing. There's not a lot of heft to it. As for what's different, obviously this is not a Super Nintendo controller, despite what appearances would tell you. This is a controller for the Nintendo Switch, made by 8Bitdo, who have released a number of different controllers for numerous Nintendo consoles based on previous console iterations. And of course, this being a Nintendo Switch controller, there is a screen capture button off to the left. There's a home button off to the right. And then you've got the two thumbsticks here, which is where I had my first issue with the controller. But we'll get into issues in just a second. Aside from that, you've also got the shoulder buttons, the L1 and L2, or the Z1 and Z1. I can't remember what Nintendo calls them. And then you have the two trigger buttons here as well. So of course those were not present on the Super Nintendo controller. And this is also a Bluetooth and a wired controller, so you can use this wirelessly with your Nintendo Switch as well as wired. So I had the chance to run this through a few different games to kind of see how it played, see how it controlled. I tried to cycle through as many different genres as possible. I played some Xenoblade Chronicles 2, some Fast BMX, or whatever that racing game is called. I've only played it once, borrowed it from a friend. I played Super Mario Odyssey, Axiom Verge, Resident Evil Revelations 2. I tried to run this thing through as many different gaming genres as possible to see how it controlled, and I got some very different results. And that's kind of what I want to touch on now. I guess we'll start with Super Mario Odyssey, right? Right off the bat, coming off of playing, like, I don't play with the Joy-Cons detached and inserted into the holder, basically. I play with the Switch Pro controller, so that is the viewpoint that I'm coming from. Controls well, it feels good. There's nothing inherently wrong with the controller. I think right now the biggest drawback for platforming games like Mario Odyssey is the fact that it's just incredibly small. And especially if you've got big hands like me, and coming off the Pro controller for the Switch, it's not that it feels bad, it just doesn't feel substantial enough, if that makes any sense. It's just so small compared to the Pro controller. I also don't really care for the fact that the thumbsticks are not inverted or angled. And this kind of goes back to my biggest criticism about the PlayStation 4 DualShock 4 controller, is the fact that the thumbsticks are right next to each other. And this is the thing that's kind of the same deal here. And it's compounded by the fact that this controller is so small. So when you're holding it like this, if you can, I don't know if you can see that, but like your thumbs are just so close together. Again, especially if you don't have small hands, it almost feels we've all seen that ad, in magazines or in television commercials where the guy's leaning over the TV and he's going like that. But you really using this for certain games, that's exactly what you feel like. You fare a little better in games like Blade Chronicles 2, where you don't need a whole lot of precision. And then I played Axiom Verge, and Axiom Verge actually felt, believe it or not, really good with this. Simply because the D-pad on the Switch Pro or on the SNES Pro is actually I'm not going to say it's as good as the Pro controller, but it's just as good, and it's a hell of a lot better than whatever that is that passes for the D-pad on the left Joy-Con. So, if you're playing something 2D and old school like Axiom Verge, this is actually a pretty good alternative to the Pro controller, and I prefer it over the Joy-Cons. And then I played that racing game, Fast RMX, I think it's called. Was not a fan. I had trouble. I switched to the Switch Pro controller, and everything felt right again. I mean, again, the biggest drawback that this thing has going for it is just that it's so small and there's no heft to it. Having said that, I guess the biggest question is should you spend the money on this? I think I spent $49.99 on this thing, right? And really, that's kind of up to you. I think the biggest thing that this has going for it is the fact that it feels so nostalgic, and it feels so, I don't know, it just feels really good to be playing a modern Nintendo console with what is essentially a Super Nintendo controller. It just feels it's not even a physical thing, right? Like mentally, it just feels right, I guess, if that makes any sense. After playing Super Mario Odyssey with it, and after playing games like Axiom Verge with it, I played Resident Evil Revelations 2. Again, the same deal. It feels fine, but coming off the Switch Pro controller, which in my opinion is probably one of, if not the best controllers on the market right now. I mean, it's certainly right up there with the Xbox One Elite, in my opinion. And it's, miles ahead of the PS4 DualShock 4, which, there's nothing wrong with that controller, but I just feel like the Switch Pro controller is better. It feels better. The thumbsticks feel better. The buttons have more give to them. Coming off the Switch Pro controller, I mean, inadequate. That's maybe the best way I can put it. Do I see myself playing a lot of games with it? Yes and no. I would not recommend playing Mario Odyssey with it. I would not recommend playing Breath of the Wild with it. I tried while I'm on the subject of Breath of the Wild, I want to talk a minute about the gyroscopic controls in this real quick. They're fine. They feel great. I was sure. I was very sure to put Breath of the Wild through its paces. Aiming gyroscopically with the controller when it comes to either your magnetism or your bow and arrow, it feels just as good as it does on the Pro controller. So that's good. It's got that going for it. But again, with Breath of the Wild, you run into the same problem. I mean, the Switch Pro controller just feels better. And if you've got both, aside from playing old school games or old school style games anyway, like Axiom Verge, I can't really say that I'd recommend this over the Pro controller. It's a nice thing to have. And if the Virtual Console ever winds up launching for the Nintendo Switch, I would certainly say, hey, I would love to play, Donkey Kong Country or Super Mario World or Final Fantasy VI on the Virtual Console with this, because I feel that's appropriate. It's a mental thing for me, right? Like, it just feels right. But aside from that, if you've got a Pro controller, unless you're a diehard Nintendo fan, like admittedly I am, then there's no real need for this. You don't need to spend your money on it. So in that sense, it's really hard to review because this is, I can't really put a number on this one. And you guys know me, I don't really like numbers anyway, but really it's on you. I mean, take that for what it's worth. I would not, I would not play Super Mario or any other Nintendo Switch game with this if I have if I have a Switch Pro controller in the house. So yeah, there it is. Not bad, but not the Nintendo Switch Pro controller by any stretch of the imagination. So those are my thoughts on the SNES Pro 30 or 30 Pro, whatever you want to call it. If you liked it, please give us a liking, or if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Doesn't bother us. But please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We would really appreciate that. And we're going to start doing more of these little controller / gadget tech reviews for you guys, because they're fun. You know, it keeps the audience engaged, and it's a break from the podcast. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate that, and I'll see you guys later.